and that is essentially one of the things that customers are dealing with today. And as a side effect of that is what we call the consumerization of IT, which is also somewhat related to mobile, but is actually bigger than that, which is that your personal use of technology and your use of technology when you're working, they are converging. And this began more clearly from the mobile world, because when you have a smartphone, you want to bring that to work. And a lot of our current workforce, they already have been using technology much before they enter the workforce, and therefore they understand technology. Unlike a generation back when a lot of the technology that you used were provided at your workplace. So people want to not carry two phones, right? I mean, at a very basic level, people don't want to have the hassle, because mobile phones, I mean, you carry them everywhere, unlike your desktop computers. And therefore, you have the additional burden. I mean, even if there is a corporate policy that prescribes a certain kind of thing, you as a consumer, because you are both, right? You also are part of the enterprise group, but you also are a consumer at your, in your personal life. You have your own choice of what you want to actually use as your personal smartphone, and you don't want to carry two of them. So there's a lot of pressure, and in many companies, the pressure from mobility and how mobile devices enter the workforce is primarily through the executives who have more influence, and they tend to actually pick these devices. I mean, I know that a lot of iDevices made it to the enterprise first, including our company, because our executives actually brought it to work. And then IT had to go back and support it, simply because there was pressure and they couldn't, that had to be done. Now, when you do that, especially in mobile, I mean, many of our customers actually, even though they are still evaluating how they handle situations like BYOD, but at this time, they're still looking at basic stuff like how do they stay in compliance, how do they make sure that basic security happens. For example, I mean, when you think of security, while in the desktop world, the first basic thing that you did was worry about malware, and therefore you would put some kind of anti-malware software on your device. For mobility, actually, the most, the bigger concern there is the fact that people may lose devices more often, or their devices that they lose or misplace may not be secured in a manner which is good enough, because people lose a lot of them. Even when people used laptops, there were thousands of laptops that people would leave behind in airport X-ray machines, right? And with mobile device, that threat has gone up several fold. So those are some of the things that people are dealing with, and mobility is top of mind for a lot of people. Now, when it comes to cloud, there are two kinds of problems. I mean, one is that cloud itself brings in a new paradigm, and like Avinash again pointed out in his trend slide, a lot of companies are evaluating at least one part of something that they today have on-premise that they are moving on the cloud, right? 50% was what he showed us the data. And I know that our survey from even the Indian market shows that 1 in 5 companies here are also considering the deployment of at least one application on the cloud at this moment, which means they are actively under deployment. Now, with the cloud, what we have realized is that even the basic need of regulatory compliance is actually what is keeping a lot of the CIOs and CISOs awake at night. So we have a large customer. I mean, this particular case, they are one of the largest publishers in the world, and they have heavy investment in the cloud. The bigger problem is that how do they stay in compliance? How do they, while you can move out a lot of your IT infrastructure onto cloud vendors, the CISO and the CIO are still responsible directly for meeting all the regulatory requirements, right? And so how do you get that in place? So our engagement was directly based on that. The second thing to remember is that in most cases, you will live in a world where you don't completely move to the cloud. There will be a lot of heterogeneous environments in which cloud exists and continues to exist with in-premise deployments. And there the big problem for people is, how do you make sure that you have a single view of all of this? Because otherwise, with every new technology deployment, you have another siloed stack to do the same thing that you are doing, which means your life becomes that much more complex. Getting data to make sense becomes that much more difficult, because with cloud, with virtualization, you now have different sets of solutions doing similar things but in different ways, and you don't have a one pane of glass to actually make sense of it all. Virtualization in the data center is no longer a new thing. Every companies probably in some stage of virtualizing their data centers, but what we are seeing as the most recent trend is that right now we are in the middle of, the mature players are in the middle of what they call the last third of their data center, which is the most mission critical applications, because those were the last to get virtualized. So that's a initiative where there is a lot of focus both from companies such as ours, which provides software that secures, have been traditionally securing your data centers, and then vendors who help manage, as to how do you take care of that in a manner that is acceptable, in a way again which supports hybrid deployment situations, right? And finally, the threat landscape. So the threat landscape, I mean, just to give you some color on the slide that you earlier saw, I mean, there is a lot of money being made in cybercrime, because unlike the people who actually were behind the virus attacks about a couple of decades back, today these are no longer teenagers sitting in their mom's garage and trying to create viruses just from a fame motivated point of view. Because earlier those were the kind of guys who created the first malware, right? And all of the large scale malware that you saw affecting millions of desktops, the motivation behind them were pretty much similar to the motivations behind graffiti writers, for example. So they were all ego driven, fame driven. They were usually the techie types. They were usually individuals, and their only motivation was to actually show the world and feel a satisfaction doing it. Today's cyber criminals are very different from that breed. They are real criminals, predominantly financially motivated. And 2 years back, we saw that the money being made in cyber crime actually exceeded money being made in in the drug trade worldwide. So just to give you a perspective, there is a lot of people who are very, very motivated, very organized, and specialized in this area simply because they are making so much money. But they are not the only guys responsible for cyber crime. As Srinath would know, probably being part of CERT India, I mean, we have been working very closely with CERT India wherever there were India-specific situations. I mean, there are other motivated actors in this whole space as well. I mean, adversarial governments, for example, state and non-state actors who used other means as intelligence gathering mechanisms or to commit cyber warfare, have moved on to the cyber world now, simply because every asset that we care about, whether it's in the government's hand, in individuals' hand, or in the business, they probably exist on a computer and are accessible through a network somewhere. I mean, most recently, just to give you an idea, a year back, some of you may have heard of this attack called Stuxnet. So while in the past you have seen several Hollywood blockbusters where the bad guys usually get onto a laptop and switch off an electricity grid in a city, and as security researchers, we always knew that that was possible. There was no demonstrated attack of that kind. Stuxnet showed how real it is. So while the victim in this particular case seemed to be Iran's the nuclear program, it was a very targeted attack on that. But actually, similar kinds of attacks with that degree of sophistication and that degree of targeting have been seen even after that. And they are all targeting different kinds of things. There was one which was targeting the chemical, specific chemical industries and looking for IP. There was another one which was essentially looking to steal design documents. There are these kind of sophisticated attacks are there. And when we talk about cyber warfare, one needs to remember that the assets being attacked are not necessarily government owned. In most countries, including India, a lot of our national infrastructure is both in government hands and public sector hands, and also in private hands. The telecom networks, for example, gas pipelines and gas refineries. So net, the amount of cybercrime that has gone up is very high. There are a lot of motivated players in this whole thing, and there are real situations where we are noticing both the volume having gone up a lot, also the amount of losses that companies incur. Now, as you know, in India, we don't have regulatory laws that require companies to declare when there is a data breach. But globally, we have data that shows that the amount of loss as a result of data breach is also steadily going up in addition to the total number of attacks themselves. In India, we ran a survey for CISOs, just to get the data through anonymous means, and that data shows also that the trend is very similar in the country as well. The third thing I wanted to point out in a threat landscape, I was in Chandigarh yesterday, and normally when I talk about threat landscape and security related stuff, mostly we are talking to the large metros, which is, and the reason was very simple, because a lot of our cybercrime activity, we used to see it in metro centers within India, right? Like places like Mumbai, Bangalore, etc. Not very surprising, because the concentration of pieces was very high. And the reason I went to Chandigarh yesterday was because we have begun to see tier 2 cities also getting impacted with cybercrime. SMBs becoming more and more targeted by criminals, and the reason is actually multifold. One reason that they are targeting those guys is because they find sometimes that the larger companies, or the companies who were traditionally under attack, they are much more protected today because they have a more mature security framework and posture today. So they find it, and the next layer, while there are lesser valuable things to be had there, the guys who go after volume cybercrime, which is the financially motivated ones, they find those easy attack targets, simply because the amount of investment into security is not high, they are not as mature. The second thing is, now because of global supply chains, sometimes they can get access to the larger companies through downstream companies, because their IT systems talk to each other today. And because of how complex the global supply chain has been. So multiple reasons, but cybercrime is beginning to impact non-traditional victims as well at this moment. And finally, the other point I wanted to make is, as enterprises are looking to deal with this whole job of how do they keep their assets secure, especially in a world where budgets are not really going up, where they have to do more with less. We have always noticed, especially because I look at risk and compliance, so one of the things that we have seen is that companies, when we research companies, they usually seem to fall in different parts of what I can call a maturity curve. At the very basic level, there are companies whose main motivation, and there are a lot of those even in the Western region, where their primary driver for security is still regulatory compliance. So regulatory compliance, in spite of all the complexity, does drive the right behavior. But like people who have already reached there realize, and we also talk about, that is a low bar, in the sense that is not just sufficient. It's a good beginning, but people who get to that level, most often they're and they start doing that successfully, automating how they whether their controls are in place, assessing them more frequently rather than an annual cycle. So their initial targets are of that kind. But soon after, people begin to ask them, their bosses begin to ask them, hey, we invested so much in stuff for security which meets our regulatory bars, but how well are we secure today? And at that point, most people realize that they really can't answer that question very well. And so they start investing, they start figuring out holes, and so if they're worried about data leakage, they start investing into technologies here and there. And they soon find that there is too many different product silos, and next day, if their boss comes and asks them, hey, show me how secure we are, it takes them an entire day to put together all that data, because they really don't have any way to do it. And when new trends such as mobility and virtualization comes, this problem just becomes more complex. Because at one level, as you mature up, what you're trying to do is put a control framework in place at some level and be able to correlate security to risk, right? Which means for your business, what do you think is the best posture? And that's the way we would like people to think, right? Just like we do in real life, which is, and risk, as you know, so far has been an annual exercise, fairly subjective, not as much based on all of the data. Now there is a new line of, I can see a lot of companies begin to look at their investment currently in security, where they are generating a lot of data, right? Your incident management product, you're monitoring all of your security products, that's generating a huge amount of data, showing you where there are virus outbreaks, where there are intrusion events, where there are firewall events, etc. On the other hand, you are also assessing, as you move up the maturity, you're looking at your controls, where are the gaps, how are you rectifying it, what that is happening. And people want to use that data, because currently this data lies in silos and you cannot utilize it. And what we are, one of the things that I am very focused on is how can you take all of this data, and it's a big data problem essentially. Can you put all this data together, correlate it with your business processes, and be able to use that in a way that makes the data actionable and intelligent for you, which means data is really not too much use to you unless you can make sense out of it and do something with it. And that's the big thing that people are trying to do. While the top-down approach, which takes some subjectivity where there are more questionnaires filled up to assess a risk posture, has got its use because it can be a broader process which is meaningful, covers a lot of things. But we believe that adding the bottoms-up thing where you take all the metrics that you have gathered and feed it into that system to correlate it actually has a very valuable thing, because you can correlate between the controls, the money that you spent putting in all those controls with actual incidents that are happening, what's going on in your environment, and try to correlate them and actually tune your investments to one that actually works best for you. All right, so that's the thing. And finally, just one point, the information explosion. I mean, on an average, we have seen our companies and our customers talk to us about the fact that their information is actually doubling every 2 years. The amount of digital data that they have to manage is doubling every 2 years. There are a couple of problems there, because storage, I mean, one of the largest parts of their budgets today are eaten up by storage, right? And storage is not growing as rapidly. So there is, we are reaching a point where this is going to be a problem. But the fact that there is so much data is also because companies are afraid to delete data. They cannot easily figure out amongst all the data that they have backed up and stored, which ones are really important. And so some of the things that customers are doing and spending a lot of time and effort on are things like, how do you make sure that you're not duplicating data and you're not saving data in different forms? Can you have better technology which can actually deduplicate? Can you make sure that you can classify much more smartly right away? Because on an average, about 70% of that data is of the kind that can be thrown away after a while. The problem is most companies do not have the confidence to delete that 70% because they really cannot make that determination using whatever technology and process they have today. So those are some of the challenges and how people are dealing with it. Like I said, mobility is still, from what I've seen, high up because it's very real right there now and people are reacting to it. Cloud is coming up more as a heterogeneous, how do we do that? And the final thing that I saw is, how do we put all of these data points that we have, how do we manage all of this complexity in a way that's really clearly actionable and we can see results from a security point of view? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. May I take a sample?
Thank you.
Good morning to all of you. And I think at the outset, I must thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to be here and talking to this group. Well, let me begin with where he ended. He said there's too much of data and the companies are not, they're not very clear, how much data they should delete. And my personal experience has been that whenever I've deleted some data, thinking it's not used, it's not required by me, next day I felt a requirement, and then I cursed myself, why did I delete the data? I mean, the same thing happens with a piece of paper when I tear it and send it away. Well, friends, by profession, I am an auditor. I'm not a technical person. So when I talk of challenges to the IT professional, I'm going to talk about the challenges which an IT manager, an IT developer, or an IT user, or a department in general faces today. Avinash, in one of his slides, mentioned that the demand on IT are continuously increasing. The IT budgets are not increasing, and somewhere deliveries are not keeping pace with the demand what comes up there. And that's a fact. Somewhere, like when there were no computers, the information requirement was much little, and when the computers come, the expectations go up, and when the expectations go up, and then the user still remains dissatisfied. So I think somewhere the issue in IT comes up, is the user satisfied or not? To me, when we talk of an information system, it must serve two purposes. First, that it must deliver what it is supposed to deliver. And second, that whatever it is delivering, is it going to add value to the company or not? If it does not add value to the company, surely it doesn't serve the purpose for which the investment was made. IT is a big investment. And if it is a big investment, somewhere the first challenge is that whether a value for money from whatever investment you have made, you are getting that value for money or not. If you're not going to get the value for money, the investment certainly has been a kind of a useless investment. Well, let me go back a little. 30 years back, 40 years back, when computerization started, one of the big challenges which was being talked about was that there was always a divide between the IT user and the IT professional. These two were not talking to each other. These two were not trying to understand each other's problem. And I find even today, this particular problem remains. The user and the IT professional, they are not on the same wavelength. And it has become more complicated today. It has become more complicated because, as you heard in the previous speakers, that the technology has advanced so much that the user gets confused as to what he should be doing. He wants to develop something, he goes to an IT professional, the IT professional comes and first he says, okay, which platform you would like to get. Now, he is very much confused, okay, what happens. So, a committees are set up for determining as to which platform should be used for developing a system. What language should you go for? What kind of system development techniques you should go for. And suddenly you find that rather than concentrating on actual requirement why he is wanting to use the IT, the user, the customer, goes into a different kind of a frenzy altogether, and he is getting into a lot of discussions, of which he has got no idea, and of which he is getting very conflicting kind of statement from vendors, because somewhere it has become vendor driven. Someone who is selling Oracle will come and telling, no, this is the perfect thing, and someone who wants to use a Microsoft platform, he said, no, that's the best thing. And I recall, our ex-president, Dr. Kalam, he once mentioned that why not just go for open source, because, if you want to save money. So then, the customer is in a very big sort of a problem as to where does he go, what does he do. Committees are set up, the committees discuss, and, even the initiation of the project gets very delayed. That to me, I think is one of the first issues which comes to me. Then, he talked about the framework. There are so many frameworks, so many standards, so many this thing. The point is somewhere when I talk of India as a country, in India, we lack that kind of a standardization or that kind of an IT strategy, at the top. Plenty of examples I can give. Take the Aadhaar. When Aadhaar picks up some data, the same data is being picked up by the population census survey, and the same data is being picked up in many of the states in many other systems. So the point is, when you are going to pick up the same data at various places, now surely data inconsistency is going to come up, and surely is going to complicate the decision making process. So the need for an IS strategy at the top, that's the one challenge. Then, if I give you another example, take the treasury computerization in India. I think in India today, nearly all treasuries are computerized. But unfortunately, all treasuries are computerized on a different data structure, on different platforms, and different manners. So if you want on any given day that you can put all the things together and you are able to get a bird's eye view of what is happening in the country in a particular field in education or health or whatever, kind of impossible. Impossible because you find that this data doesn't really match with each other, and it's not possible, for anyone to even comprehend what kind of data structure which particular department has, and things like that. Again, that kind of, lack of uniformity, very important, a very big challenge, when it comes to developing IT, as such. Now, so then there are plenty of examples, which one I can come up with, where I say that, when it comes down to ensuring uniformity of data structure, when it comes down to ensuring that whatever systems you develop, the systems are kind of speaking to each other. Very recently, Indian government is going for what they call the CPSMS, centralized, this is, for monitoring the central plan scheme monitoring system. Now, you have a CPSMS which is coming up, which is supposed to be monitoring all the centralized plan scheme. But for all plan scheme, you already have a computer setup. When you talk of MNREGA, MNREGA has got a wonderful computer setup, where the district level or the village level information is picked up, fed into the computer. On any given day, you can go to the site and you can find out how much money was distributed in which district on which particular day to which consumer and all that, and then you can go and but the point is you have that setup already there. So rather than putting these setup together and coming with CPSMS, CPSMS is coming in a different manner. So this kind of an approach of computerization coming in isolation, each department thinking, yes, this is my requirement, let me go my way, I suppose poses a big challenge to IT when it comes into the government sector. Well, this is about the data and the uniformity and the IT strategy and things like that. Now, the second challenge which I think comes is, when we are talking about outsourcing. He talked about, the first speaker talked about that outsourcing the 5th or the 6th or the 7th. The point is when you are outsourcing,